Now can you hear me? Good, because I want you to all hear me. Welcome to the City Council meeting for the City of Agoura Hills. We're so happy to have all of you here tonight. Let me start with a little business. If you wish to speak tonight, please submit a speaker's card to the city clerk. That's Kimberly Rodriguez over there. Prior to the item being heard, please turn off all cell phones. I'm going to do that myself. And other electronic devices during the meeting. Assisted listening is available in the council chambers. Please see the city clerk for use of a personal listening advice. So anybody who can't hear, feel free to talk to Kimberly. I'm so excited tonight again that we have the Cub Scout Pack 227 to lead us in the flag salute. Will you please start?
Attention, will the audience please rise? Color Guard, advance. Hand salute. Those not in uniform, please put your right hand over your heart. Please say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2. Color Guard, post the colors. Color Guard dismissed. The audience may be seated.
Thank you. That was a wonderful job. And I just want to note that tonight is volunteer recognition. And Cub Scout Pack 227 comes in here once a month, and they take the time, and their parents take the time to lead us in the flag salute. And we so appreciate all of your time doing that. So thank you, Cub Scout Pack 227. Now we'll move on to the roll call. Ms. Rodriguez, can you please call the roll?
Yes, good evening. Councilmember Anstead?
Here.
Councilmember Lopez?
Here.
Councilmember Northrup?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Weber? Mayor Buckley Weber?
Here.
Mayor Buckley Weber, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We canceled tonight's closed session, so we have no report. So we'll just move on to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, the agenda is approved. Thank you. So we're going to jump right into presentations, and I'm going to head over here. Can you still hear me? Oh, nice. That's impressive. Okay. So tonight, I'd like to call up Jerry Kaddish. I know he's here. There he is. Come on up, Jerry. I'm going to step down here, so Can you still hear me? Yeah. That's our new sound equipment. Congratulations, staff. It all works. Okay. Jerry Kaddish has been employed by All City Management Services, Incorporated, for the past 15 years as a school crossing guard. During this time, he has assisted school children crossing the street at the intersection of Lake Lindero Drive and Thousand Oaks Boulevard, which is a very popular intersection. Jerry is very popular with everyone he encounters and is a beloved crossing guard. Jerry learned the baking trade from the ground up at the family bakery owned by his aunt and uncle. He started working at the age of 13, and by the time he was 19, he was decorating wedding cakes. He then served 16 months in the Army during the Korean War, where he was a private first class. Jerry worked briefly in the electronics industry and continued his work baking and decorating cakes. He and his wife, Arlene, moved to Agora Hills in 1992, and at that time, Jerry decided to semi-retire, but was interested in working part-time. He saw an ad in the newspaper for a crossing guard and jumped at the opportunity. When Jerry first started as a crossing guard, the school was called Yerba Buena Elementary, but later became known as Lindero Canyon Middle School, and he is still there 15 years later. Jerry loves his job, loves the students he watches over daily, and is much appreciated by school officials and the parents because he keeps the children out of harm's way. Sorry about that. He has a positive attitude, a pep in his step, is respectful, and is always diligent with his duties. Jerry recently celebrated his 90th birthday, still bakes. Jerry still bakes at least once a week. He gardens around his immaculate Agora Hills home, rides his bike each day, and he and his beloved wife Arlene have been married almost 65 years. Yay. They have 3 sons, 4 granddaughters, 1 grandson, and 2 great-granddaughters. He was named the Acorn Man of the Year last December and recognized for being the oldest or most senior crossing guard still employed in the city of Agora Hills. Jerry, on behalf of the City Council, I wish to present you with this Jerry Kaddish proclamation and congratulate you on your 15 years of service. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, a few words. When I left my profession and I was looking for a job in the industry, and I could do everything, I couldn't find any work once I passed the age of 62 years old. So as time went on, I decided I got to do something. And I saw an ad in the Acorn, and I decided to give it a try. As a crossing guard, the hours were great. But the first couple of weeks, or actually a couple of months, it was so difficult. I work at Lake Lindero. I've been there for all these years, Lake Lindero and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And a lot of times I forget at 90 years old, you forget what you're going to do next. Anyhow, where was I? When I started out, the company, I got to say, there are people here from my company, but I got to say, they would give you an orange uniform, and the students are pretty smart, and they know that you're new here, and like a substitute teacher, they would take advantage of you. And the first 2 months, actually 2 years, was difficult. But what kept me there was I knew they're going to go up, they're going to go to college or get a job, and every 2 years or every year, new students are going to come. And it got better, and it got better, and it got better. And what people don't realize is I've learned a lot over the years. I learned that there are nice people, drivers. There are drivers that yell at you and scream at you, and I could never hear what they're saying because they're going too fast. It's made it really great. But most of the drivers they're all in a hurry. But many drivers would, when I put out my hand to say, you got to wait, they'll go, or thumbs up. And 95% of these drivers are really great. And 5%, there's always that 5%. But as time went on, they all got better. And the advantage of it, I made so many friends during the period of time I was there. Not only merchants in the area, people, but you're not supposed to stand and talk, but you can't help but meet people. But since this ad came out in the Acorn, there's people that have opened their window and, hi, Jerry, and the people know me by name, and I don't know who they are, but it's but it's a good feeling. And I'm saying after 15 years, I just loved it the last 13 years, 14 years. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Here, this is for you, Jerry. This is for you. Got that? Thank you. Oh yeah, Jerry. And tonight, what we're giving to all of you volunteers, because we appreciate it so much, are water bottles so that you can refill them, because we're not using plastic at City Hall or up at the event center anymore. And we are drinking from the sink. We have filters now, and we will be putting in some refilling stations in some of our public properties. So it's time to get rid of plastic bottles, so we're giving you all a really nice reusable water bottle. Gary, this is for you, a water bottle. Just refill it in the morning and take it to you show those kids what a cool water bottle you have. Okay. Let's see here. I think I'm just going to start right up here. Good evening. Don't need this one anymore. Okay. On behalf of the Agora Hills City Council, I would like to thank everyone for coming to the City of Agora Hills annual volunteer recognition event. Tonight is all about our hundreds of volunteers who contribute countless hours of their time and energy into making the City of Agora Hills a better community in which to live, play, and work. As Irma Bombeck, a great American humorist, said, quote, "Volunteers are the only human beings on the face of the earth who reflect the nation's compassion, unselfishness, caring, patience, and just plain loving one another," end quote. On behalf of the entire City Council and City staff, I would like to start by thanking all of the volunteers of 2019. Your involvement was truly impressive and valued. Each volunteer offers their own unique skills in a variety of groups and committees. Tonight, we will honor some extraordinary people for giving above and beyond their call of civic duty. We all know about the tragedy of the helicopter crash that happened in Calabasas last week, and we're all moved by it. But I just want you all to know that Kobe Bryant, who was an amazing athlete, he was an Academy Award winner, but in the end, he was a volunteer, just like you. He taught youth sports. So it doesn't matter if you're helping somebody prepare a tax return, or you're on a teen advisory committee, or you're a member of our CERT, every one of you has done something great for us, and volunteers make our community work. So I want to applaud all of you, and we're recognizing every one of you. No volunteer job is insignificant. No volunteer job is too small to be recognized. So just know that I speak on behalf of the entire City Council and our city staff, that we could not do this without each and every one of you. So thank you for being here. And I'm now going to have our recreation manager, Nick Newkirk, to begin our volunteer recognition event.
Stay right there. You can go right down there. Okay, thank you, Mayor Buckley Weber. On behalf of the Department of Community Services, we'd like to thank you for attending this evening. As I call your name, please proceed up front where a council member or the mayor will thank you on behalf of the City of Agora Hills. Once you have received your gifts, we ask that you remain up here, move over to the center of the City Council dais, where we will take a picture of the entire group with the council member or the mayor. These gifts are just a small token of our appreciation. We would also like to ask that you hold your applause until the entire group has been read so that we can hear everyone's name. All right, see if this works. I moved it. There we go. All right, the architectural review panel. Mayor Buckley Weber, will you please step down to the center floor area? The architectural review panel assists the planning department in reviewing new commercial and residential development applications for compliance with the city's architectural design standards and guidelines. Francisco Bear and Albert Croft. I'm going to actually ask Mayor Buckley Weber to come up here so she can announce the CERT Team Member of the Year.
And I'm going to invite Jeff Wachtel to come up here and join me. Jeff, would you come up and help me? Each year, our Agora Hills Community Emergency Response Team, which we call CERT, acknowledges one of our own for their hard work and hours of commitment to the group and the city. I am pleased to announce that this year's CERT volunteer is David Wing. David, will you come up and join us? I'll give this to you in a minute. Congratulations. Here are a few facts about David. David has been a member of our Agora Hills Community Emergency Response Team since February of 2009. David has been instrumental in assisting Agora Hills CERT with its radio communication needs. He actively participates in the Monday night call-outs with CERT. David was responsible for replacing our emergency radio equipment approximately 2 years ago. If you were not aware, the Woolsey fire destroyed nearly everything in the system. He was instrumental in getting new equipment specified and replaced again, and our CERT group is happy to report that they are back on the air again. David continues to be an active part of our team and the city of Agora Hills, and CERT want to honor and thank him for his essential service to our city. David, on behalf of the City Council and the city of Agora Hills, I'd like to present this plaque to you as the 2019 CERT Disaster Response Team Member of the Year. Thank you so much. Jeff, would you like to say a few words?
I'm going to add a tiny bit to that. You know, if a fire came along and destroyed everything I had just put in, I think I'd be moaning and saying some things I can't say here under my breath about it. But David never said a thing. David just put his, nose to the grindstone and got busy and helped us get this all going again. It's been a pleasure working with you on this, number one. And number two, I do want to tell you that it took the CERT board about 15 seconds, okay, maybe a minute, to decide that you were the guy who should get our award this year. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Kimberly wants to get a picture of us. Can we get
Right here.
right over here?
Yeah. I don't want to be in the picture. Yeah, there's David. Yeah, no, he's right there. The CERT team is a group of individuals who are trained to assist in the event of an emergency in such capacities as medical, traffic control, and care and shelter. They also attend community events and assist with first aid. I do apologize in advance if I mess up anybody's names. There are a lot of names. Greg Acevedo, Kirk Allegro, Kevin Austin, Danielle Blanc-Chowdhury, Tony Donadio, Robert Doram, Dario Eminente, Stuart Goodman, Shirley Gu, Bob Hazard, Patricia Higgins, Richard Iacovelli, Rob Jones, Norman Hume, Brent Cast, Diane Lemoyne, Ann Novick, Bill Novick, Mark Paris, Christy Reeves, Evan Reeves, San Slauson, Jeff Wachtel, Tony Wurtenbrook, David Wing, and Jeremy Wolf.
Can you get you guys to squeeze in a little bit, please? Yeah, thank you. Can you just squeeze in? Can you move in a little bit? Okay. Perfect. 1, 2.
The city treasurer approves the city's investment of funds and also reviews the city's investment reporting. Vivian Avella. The Community Center Joint Powers Authority is the governing board of the Agora Hills Calabasas Community Center. Jim Bukowski, Darylyn Childress, Matt Heller, Ethan Pavone, Brad Rosenheim, and Penny Sylvester. I know, right?
Just do one more.
At this point, I would like to ask Mayor Pro Tem Weber to step down to the gift area to present the next few groups. The Community Concert Band Board. The concert band performs 3 times a year in Agora Hills and Westlake Village and proudly showcases nearly 50 members in the concert and jazz bands. The board advises staff in such areas as location, music selection, and acts as a liaison to the board. Stephanie David, Robert Hackett, Derek Pova, Don Sumwalt, and David Ubersax. The Community Services Coalition is responsible for monitoring and actively addressing quality of life issues affecting this community. They have conducted citywide surveys that focus youth at risk and teen services and bettering the community as a whole. Joyce Corridori, Sue Lapisto, Devin Rosenheim, and Russell Sharp. They're all doing a survey. The Community Service Days Committee assists staff in identifying projects, securing funding, recruiting volunteers, and the overall implementation of this event. Craig Beaker, Angela Cutbill, Owen Nostrand, Russ Sharp, and Jeremy Wolf. Oh, wow. Oh, boy.
But he works in Agora Hills.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. The Cultural Arts Council advises the Department of Community Services on programs and activities, as well as promoting arts and culture throughout the Agora Hills area. Tracy Burson, Karen Kent, Priscilla Kromnick, Jessica Reinhart, and Alyssa Spalding. At this point, I would like to ask Councilmember Klein Lopez to step down to the gift area to present the next few groups. The Friends of the Agora Hills Library. The purpose of the Friends is to maintain an association to promote knowledge of the functions, resources, services, and needs of the Agora Hills Library, to assist in bringing to the library funds for special needs beyond the command of the library budget, to support educational and literary purposes, and to stimulate the gifts of books, magazines, desirable collections, endowments, and bequests to the library. This group also includes the Friends of the Library Board of Directors. I would like to first call up the board and have them remain up here as I call up the Friends after. The Board of Directors: Tom Allen, Diane Haupt, Eric Haupt, Stephen Levine, Kathy McBean, Jan Meisels Allen, Rose Topolis, Joan Yakovone, Judy Carta, Mike Richards, and Raya Segui. And the Friends of the Agoura Hills Library: Robert Allen, Bobby Constantin, Lois Darling, Jim Fox, Nancy Fox, Jean Gall, Dottie Grant, Matthew Greenberg, Alicia Gross, Suzanne Hansen, Norman Hughes, Charles Jackson, Jeff Jacoby, Sharon Janis, Hannah Kraus, Bill Maddox, Alyssa Mayer, Sam Mazzilli, Allison Merkel, Shannon Murphy, Herb Oberman, Nina Olander, Jan Perkel, Marcy Richards, Simon Schaefer, Linda Spiewak, Natalie Spiewak, Nate Spiewak, Cindy Takayama, Rose Topolis, Pharaoh Tornes, and Clyde Tornes.
Can I get you all to come together? Bobby, can I get you all to come together in the center? I'm gonna need you to squeeze in here. Cindy, wanna squeeze in?
Wait, Kim, you got one more.
I know. You're gonna squeeze in more. Maybe move in the front. That's fine. It's fine. Just maybe come in the front. Yeah. You want to move in closer? Did you want me to hold? I can't see anybody.
Everybody pretend like you like each other.
Cindy, you need to move. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. We're good.
Hey. The One City, One Book Committee has representatives from the local community and the Agoura Hills Library to coordinate the educational events of the One City, One Book program. They also assist in selection of the book. Nina Hull, Tina Johnson, Judy Carta, Karen Kent, Rachel Lizotte, Katie Magaha, Randy Paller, and Joan Yakovone. Yeah, probably not. The Planning Commission acts in an advisory capacity to the City Council on legislative land use matters and makes decisions on new commercial and residential development applications. Kate Anderson, John Asuncion, Michael Justice, Murtaza Morgi, and Jeremy Wolf. The Reyes Adobe committee members help plan and organize specific events within the Reyes Adobe Day celebration, while the volunteers assist in the implementing of activities such as the Senior Fiesta, Day at the Adobe, and the Art Gallery. Tracy Burson, Randy Paller, Jessica Reinhart, Jeff Wachtel, Ellen Wohl, and Jerry Wolf. At this point, I would like to ask Councilmember Anstead to step down to the gift area to present the next few groups. And Ms. Wohl, you can just stay there for a second. You're in the next few groups. Get comfy. You got more water bottles coming. The Reyes Adobe Historical Site docents provide tours geared towards educating people of all ages about the Rancho period, early California life, and our cultural heritage. Rosalie Bell, Barbara Benson, Fran Blair, Bobby Constantin, Bill Maddox, Claire Martin, Nina Olander, Bobby Pershing, Joyce Peterson, Chuck Pettit, Audrey Rich, Cindy Takayama, Maria Vasquez, Jesse Williams, and Ellen Wohl. Yeah, go get in there with that paper.
You don't have to crouch.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay. It'll be quick. It'll be quick. Okay. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
The Senior Advisory Committee members assist staff with the development of recreational programs and activities of interest to local seniors. Bobby Constantin, Claire Martin, Tony Playa, Sharon Taylor, Pat Wiesel, and Ellen Wohl. Is that it for the... I think you are, yes. Did you get all your water bottles? Okay, good. The senior program volunteers donate time and skills to facilitate and maintain some of the ongoing senior programs and activities. Lacey Brink, Mario Caron, Bobby Constantin, Shirley Diffenderfer, Bruce Fleck, Marilyn Guild, Estelle Halsey, Jerry Larson, Claire Martin, Robert Norgel, Dorothy Orr, Tony Playa, Maggie Saffel, Sharon Taylor, Ursula Troop, Maria Vasquez, and Sue Wellerstein. Our tax preparation volunteers are trained by the IRS and the AARP and assist the community in doing their yearly taxes for free. They accommodate approximately 100 people a year. Herb Eckerling, Bob Harper, Nicole Honda, Marcy Kinsey, David Ross, Susan Schaefer, Mel Takata, and David Weitz. At this point, I would like to ask Councilmember Northrup to step down to the gift area to present our last few groups. The Teen Coalition acts in an advisory role to city staff to discuss how they can make an impact on the community. Ella Brink, Julia Shapiro, Alagu Vishwanathan. The Teen Planning Advisory Committee meets to plan and implement new teen events and programs. Dulce Castaneda, Lily Grant, Lily Montez, Avery Phillips, Charlotte Smith, Brooke Spellerberg, Mia Sprong, Amelia Stone, and Annie Vincent. The Teen VIP program is a year-round program in which teens earn service learning hours by doing volunteer work with the city, such as working at special events, camps, classes, and much more. This is our longest and biggest group, so I do apologize in advance for any names. Stephen Adams, Sophie Balses, Jenna Barshini, Eric Berger, Ella Brink, Elena Broom, Isla Brown, Amelia Castillo, Rod Danish, Chalini Dua, Johnny Elder, Jenna Elzeru, Leah Elzeru, I apologize for this one, Atharv Gang Darmoth, I apologize, Lucas Geyer, Grace Goldenberg, Kate Goldenberg, Lux Hanley, Ava Harrison, Aiden Hook, Colin Hook, Rebecca Iofi, Gogo Kashal, Jan Kashal, Jake Korbekian, Jacob Krakauer, Maya Mahood, Bryson Masrow, Lily Moscott, Sophia Murdoch, Ethan Pearl, Avery Phillips, Dasha Polich, Juliana Post, Brady Prince, Kyle Prince, Uma Ram, Kimberly Ramos, Elliot Rosen, Nicole Sheff, Marlau Satchery, Caitlin Stange, Daniel Sabotnik, Brooke Todd, Debusha Vidavel, Logan Victoria, Alagu Vishnawathian, Daria Waller, and Genevieve Weissman. You might have to double up. It's great. She's pretty good.
Okay, we got a couple pictures here, okay?
These are going on the city's Facebook page.
You are. Just try. 1, 2. Instagram at age teens. Okay.
Just gonna drink out of my new water bottle here. Wow, that's great. Our tennis league coordinators are 3 individuals who plan and implement tennis leagues at the Agora High School tennis courts. They run men's, women's, and co-ed leagues. Gary Barker, Karen Fassell, and Sharon McDonald. And our last group for the evening is the Volunteers on Patrol. The Volunteers on Patrol are dedicated to providing excellent service through relationships that build trust, create a safe environment, and enhance the quality of life in our community. These volunteers assist the community by acting as additional eyes and ears for the Sheriff's Department, by patrolling the community for criminal activity, assisting at sobriety checkpoints, conducting traffic control, and many other public safety duties. Rami Awad, Jeff Brown, and Dean Montalon. This concludes the gift presentation, but I'd like to send it back to Mayor Buckley Weber.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, everybody. Again, the annual volunteer recognition event is the city's way of thanking all of you for all the hundreds of hours that you've put in. I particularly want to thank the young people that are here tonight, and I hope you look around this room and you make a lifetime of commitment to be a volunteer somewhere for some interest that you have. You can see that many people have been doing this all their life, and I'm really excited that you've started so young, and I hope you continue it on your journey of life. This evening is just a small token of our heartfelt appreciation. I know I speak for the entire council and the staff that you all make Agora Hills a great place to live. Again, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you, and we hope you had a nice evening. And we are going to take a little break right now. You are welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, but if you want to leave, now would be a good time, so feel free. Thank you again. Thank you again for being here. But believe it or not, we actually have business to conduct. One more picture. Go ahead, take your time. We really appreciate all that you do. Okay, we're going to get started. And I'm going to just make a little change in the agenda right now. We are going to go with the we're going to Intergovernmental Special Purpose Committee and departmental reports. And I think we'll start with Mr. Haverstock. He's been waiting so patiently. So we're going to take him out of order for the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce update. You sure I think it's good that you go first.
Program. I was looking forward to seeing.
Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you want.
So a couple items for you this evening, Madam Mayor. Thank you for having me. First and foremost, a quick thank you. I talked quite a bit about Restaurant Week the last month or so, and we had a great turnout for our kickoff event over at Twisted Oak Tavern. One VIP in particular, the mayor and her husband came out and enjoyed a beer on Visit Conejo Valley. So thank you for coming out. I think you can attest it was a well-attended event, and we think that we're going to get the data really soon for all of the outreach, that we received through all of our marketing. But I think just anecdotally, it was a really wonderful success, and we were happy to support the restaurant community. Wanted to tell you about the Chamber's annual award gala coming up on Friday, March 6th. It's going to be at the Hyatt Regency Westlake, and I think I said last time it's Dodger baseball themed. I can tell you that we have a special guest that's going to be there. 10-time All-Star and 1974 National League MVP Steve Garvey is going to be at the event. And we have also notified all our winners, so I can tell you about all of our winners. Our Business of the Year is Atara Biotherapeutics. Our Woman of the Year is Leanne Nielsen from California Lutheran University. Our Man of the Year is Scott Harris from Mustang Marketing. Our Nonprofit of the Year is Conejo Free Clinic. Our Ambassador of the Year is Debbie Soden from Caldwell Banker Real Estate. Our Corporate Sponsor of the Year is Tech Ahead here in Agoura Hills. And our Volunteer of the Year is Bob Bland, who is the head of the Conejo Compassion Coalition. So we do think we have an all-star list of honorees this year, and so hopefully you all can make it on Friday, March 6th. Tickets are for sale on conejochamber.org. I wanted to briefly mention the 2020 census is coming up this year, something that's very important, and the Chamber of Commerce is involved in getting the word out to the business community. Census Day is going to be on April 1st. That's the actual count day, but we'll be seeing information about the census as early as next month to try and get a good and accurate count. The Chamber will be putting information out in our newsletter. We'll be using our social media, our website, any way that we can encourage more people to participate. Every undercounted person during the census count amounts to about $2,000 per year in lost vital funding for our local social services. So it's very important to get a good count, and we are committed to being part of that. Oh, and I'll also mention for the first time, the census is online. You can also do a paper census. You can also phone in your census, but for convenience, it's going online for the first time. So if people want to do that online, they can. I mentioned last time, but I'll just say once again, nominations are open for the 40 Under 40 Awards. These are awards for young professionals in the community that are under the age of 40 that live or work in Thousand Oaks, Westlake Village, or Agoura Hills. They can be nominated on our chamber website at conejochamber.org, and the awards are going to be on May 7th, Thursday, May 7th, at the Canyon Club. So over here, mark your calendars. And then finally, I wanted to mention the Chamber's Legislative Roundtable meeting coming up not this Tuesday, but the next Tuesday, February 25th. It's at 8 a.m. at our Chamber office. I bring it up because we're going to have a great speaker. Jennings ML, who is from the United States Chamber of Commerce, is going to be there to give us a policy update. So we have an especially heavy hitter speaker, and so I wanted to spread the word if anyone would be interested in attending that. The meeting is free. It's open to the public. And anyone is welcome to attend and hear a wonderful policy update. Unless there are any questions, that does conclude my report this evening.
Any questions? Thank you so much. And I just want to say, and if you'll pass the message on to the Chamber, that I'm absolutely thrilled that you're taking such an active role in the census.
Thank you.
It is really important, and I'm glad you guys are jumping in.
I think a lot of people don't realize they are already paying these tax dollars to Washington, D.C. The census is how we get our fair share back from Washington, D.C. It brings money into our community and costs nothing than what you're already paying in your tax burden. So we are on board about bringing dollars into our community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on our list is, we're very lucky to have Jeff Klein from Los Angeles County. He's the Civic Engagement, Community Relation, and Legislation Manager. And he's here tonight to speak to us about voting solutions for all people. He's from the Los Angeles County Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk's Office. So welcome. Thank you for coming out here tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me and making time. I'm going to do the sort of abbreviated version of this presentation in essence of time. But obviously, if you have any questions, happy to address any. Do I need a, are you going to click it? Okay, great. So the purpose of us getting out into the community is to educate residents all over LA County about all the changes that are occurring, and we're just weeks away from the election. We also want to make ourselves available to residents within Agoura Hills. If you have any stakeholders you'd like us to connect with or organizations in the area, we're happy to always connect. And we will continue doing outreach even after the primary election because, as we know, a lot of people don't necessarily always pay attention to the primary. So we're happy to keep presenting and connecting with the community all the way through the general election. So the overview that I'm going to talk about today is the new voter experience. And we call it a new voter experience because it's more than just a new voting device. It's more than just a new voting period. There's a whole bunch of changes. So this is the slide I'm going to focus on, and then I have a video that recaps everything, and then happy to do any questions that you might have. So the first part of our new voter experience is what we call the electronic poll book. Whether or not you're an in-person voter or you vote by mail, this is part of the process is familiar. So currently, when you go into a polling place, you give your name and address, and they look you up in the roster, and then the voter would sign. The paper roster will be replaced with an electronic poll book, and the reason for that is we can now look up voters anywhere in LA County because voters are no longer assigned to a specific location. Beginning February 22nd, we'll have it's actually about 235 locations around LA County, and voters can use any of those locations. And then for the last 4 days of the election, we have almost 1,000 locations, and voters last 4 days of the voting period, so this Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Election Day, we'll have up to 1,000. And voters can use any of those locations around LA County. So the electronic poll book allows us to look someone up wherever they go. They would vote their ballot. So let's say a resident of Agoura Hills was in Long Beach visiting family on the Wednesday before the election. We would look that voter up, give them their ballot, and mark them as voted real time. So it allows us to maintain the integrity of the election while also providing convenience to voters where they have 11 days and they can go anywhere in LA County. Also with electronic poll books, we can offer something called conditional voter registration. What that is, it's if anyone missed the voter registration deadline, for example, you can now register to vote up to and on election day. You can also change your address, and you can even change your political party, which is really important because during the presidential primary elections, the rules change depending on which party you're registered to, of who you can vote for, especially for the no party preference voters. So you can take advantage of conditional voter registration. We call it conditional because our goal is to try to clear and validate your registration on the spot. If we're not able to do that, your ballot will be conditional. We'll process it back at our office. As long as you're eligible, it will count for the election. Another activity we can now do with the electronic poll book that we couldn't do before, if you are a vote by mail voter, You can show up. If you haven't returned your vote by mail ballot, we can now cancel your vote by mail ballot and give you a regular ballot just like everyone else would receive. And this avoids the need for provisional voting for those voters. In the past, if you showed up and we had noted that you had a vote by mail ballot, we had no way to find out if you've returned it, so now we can go ahead and cancel that. So a lot of changes with the electronic poll book. Moving on to the modern tally system. This is a little more on the administrative side. It allows us to do more efficient audits, more efficient recounts if someone chooses to have a recount. But the main reason I have it in this presentation because we want to emphasize it's still a paper-based voting system. So when you check in, you get a paper ballot, you go over to the ballot marking device, you insert your paper ballot, and it'll print directly on the paper ballot. And that's what we count through our tally system. We're not downloading results, it's not internet voting, there's no computerized voting. Everything is done via paper through our tally system. Moving on to the interactive sample ballot, this is a new service, it's optional. Voters will get their paper sample ballot booklets in the mail. Those are currently in the process of going out. Some people in the county have received them. Some people will receive them. If you haven't received it yet, you'll receive it by the end of this week. We send out about 6 million of those sample ballots, so it does take time to get out to all parts of the county. But the interactive sample ballot is optional. You can go online. In fact, you can do it right now. You can go on, look up your ballot, mark all your selections electronically via your mobile device or your computer. You generate a poll pass. It's basically a QR code. Then when you check in, you receive your paper ballot. You'll scan the poll pass, and it instantly transfers your selections onto the ballot marking device. It's not your vote. You still have to print, confirm, and cast your ballot, but it's just an expedited process to save voters time if they don't want to sit there marking all their selections. As you probably are aware, the ballot will be very long for this election, so we wanted to create an expedited process where voters would save time. They could be in and out theoretically in 10 minutes. The interactive sample ballot has no personal information on it, so if you decide not to use it or you lose it, no one can take your vote, no one can take your personal information. It's really just an electronic version of your contests. Okay, the ballot marking device. This is our signature device. It's our new device. We developed it. It's owned 100% by LA County. We designed it in partnership with a design firm. It was about a 10-year process to create our new voting system. It's fully accessible. If you have a sip and puff device, you can plug it in and you can vote your ballot using your sip and puff device. It has an attached headset. You can get your ballot in language of your choice. We serve voters in English plus 12 languages, so you can have a translated ballot on the ballot marking device. And again, it is a paper-based voting system, and so it prints directly onto the paper. A couple notes about it: there's no internet connection, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, so there are always concerns about election tampering or hacking and things like that. There's no way for that to happen because it is not connected to anything, and it doesn't even store information. There's no network inside the device. Even though you see a touch screen on there, it's very intuitive. When voters use it, they realize just how intuitive it is. We worked with a lot of senior communities, all kinds of demographics, and everyone's found it very easy to use. I don't know if anyone here's had an opportunity. We used it in the mock election as well, and we also ran a pilot election, and voters found it pretty easy to use. The voting period and vote centers, those go together. So as mentioned, starting this election, you'll be able to vote anywhere in LA County at any vote center. You'll have 11 days. Again, on February 22nd, we'll open about 235 vote centers. And then for the last 4 days of the voting period, we will have about 1,000 vote centers, and you can go anywhere. And this is a big convenience for voters because we are such a mobile society. It's really taking the election to where people are at. So you could vote by your work, by your home. If you go to school, there might be a vote center on campus. Most colleges and universities, we have vote centers at those locations. So all over LA County. And also the last point I want to bring up is our new vote by mail ballot. It is, the ballot's not really new. We rolled it out in 2018, so fairly new. It's a lot more intuitive. You mark directly on the ballot itself. What is new is we'll have approximately 200 drop box locations around LA County, and voters can drop their ballot off in any of the drop box locations, or they can mail it back. It's all postage paid, or you can walk it into a vote center. So a lot of options to be able to return your vote by mail ballot. So that's the summary. I'll go ahead and play the video, and then we could do questions.
The The election is just around the corner, and Los Angeles County has a new way for voters to make their voices heard. New Los Angeles County vote centers are located throughout the county. Cast your ballot near your home, work, or favorite park. Voters can go anywhere. To find a vote center that's convenient, visit lavote.net and find one that works best for you. Instead of waiting for one day to vote, you are now able to vote across 11 days. Once you've arrived, a vote center assistant will greet you and check you in before taking you to the ballot marking device. Did you know that there is a new interactive sample ballot that lets you pre-mark your selections online and generate a poll pass? A unique QR code that will let you quickly transfer, review, and cast your selections on a paper ballot at the County Vote Center. The new ballot marking device includes an audio ballot, a touch screen, and a tactile keypad to make voting faster and more accessible. You can also select your language, change the font size, and adjust the contrast for easy viewing. Then, after you make your selections or scan your poll pass, you can review your ballot to verify your choices and cast your ballot by feeding the paper ballot back into the ballot marking device. There's no need to give your ballot to a vote center assistant. You cast it on the same device. Welcome to the future of voting in Los Angeles County. Fast, convenient, and easy. Go to vsap.lavote.net to exercise your right to vote and let your voice be heard.
All right, so that's the project in a nutshell. And any questions or comments?
Yes, Councilmember Lopez.
Hi, thank you.
Sure.
I've been to a few of your mock setups, including one we had here in our library, and it's definitely intuitive, and I like the headset, so thank you for sending those out all over the county. My question is, what kind of assurances have you put in place to ensure what I've read is the major criticism of this system, which is that you can't fit all of the candidates or options on one screen, forcing you to scroll, and the fear is that if you don't see that scroll button or, for any reason you miss that, then it might be unfairly giving an advantage to the people who appear at the top of the options. So have you put some measures in place that ensure people scroll through all the options?
Yes, so the more button that you mentioned is, so we do have some data that we've gotten back from our pilot election and our mock election that do show that voters are aware of the more button and they are using the more button. The candidate that won in the pilot election that we held in Long Beach, it was the voters had the choice to use the ballot marking device or the old Vote system. The candidate who won, you had to hit the more button to get down to their name, and so they received the most votes. In fact, the candidate got a higher percentage of votes on the ballot marking device than they did on the old Vote system. And the candidate that got the fewest votes was actually the number 2 on the list. In the mock election, we did see that voters were also using the more button, and those were not real contests. They were vote for your favorite fun zone and so forth. So some evidence there, we see that voters are aware of it. But there is concern around that, and one thing that we're doing is every voter that walks into the vote center will receive a postcard. It explains how to vote, and it highlights that there is a more button. The poll worker training or election worker training, it highlights the more button. There's a number of different sort of examples they go through and exercises. So we are trying to be proactive, just to ensure that everyone is made aware and our workers are educated about that issue. Sure, thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question. You mentioned that if you wanted to use your sample ballot, that there was an app that you could then bring your phone in. What's the app?
It's not really an app. You go to a link on our website. It's the old. If you go to our website and you look for your sample ballot or your where people used to look that up, that page has been replaced with the interactive sample ballot page, so you can look at your selections there, and then you can make your you can generate that poll pass by filling that out, and then you just save it on your mobile device, very similar to like an airline boarding pass. So you don't really have to download an app for that. It's a screenshot, or you could print it out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. That is the lavote.net is our website for the department.
Okay, and then you go to sample ballot.
Yeah, it says there's an elections tab, and then it says look up my voting information. I think it's.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? We have questions from the audience.
Oh, sure.
Do you have time to take a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Mr. Wolf, do you want to come up to the microphone or just?
So everyone should have received, if you haven't received it yet, you'll receive it any day now, but we sent a booklet out to all households in LA County. It listed all the vote centers. But you can actually go online right now to lavote.net. There's a lookup tool. You can type in an address or just a city. It'll bring up the 3 closest locations, but you can actually zoom out on a map and see a bigger area of locations. So.
And what I would add to that is just there's 2 polling places in the city of Agoura Hills, but there's plenty more in Westlake, Calabasas, et cetera. But just know that not every polling place will be open for 11 days. So be sure to check on the website.
Yeah, and so the website actually clearly identifies that, and you can toggle between 4 and 11 day too. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
I was just going to say that e-sample ballot is the very top of the page on lavote.net on the mobile site. So,
Great.
Yeah, it's right there.
Yeah, we tried to design everything for both mobile and desktop, so because we know people use both.
Excellent. Well, I'm very impressed.
All right,
So I
thank you
think
so
it's
much.
really, it's definitely futuristic to me. But
And I just want to say, I want to thank the city because Agoura Hills has always been such great partners with our office, so we really appreciate from the mock election to the demo and everything. So
Well,
really
thank you. We're
appreciate
glad you're here.
Okay.
And we're glad that the polling place is here.
that. All right.
And everything else in between. So thank you very
So
much.
if anyone else had questions, I'll just wait in the back for a couple minutes if anyone from
Great.
the audience was.
Thank you so much for driving
so
out here.
much.
We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, next on our list is we have some very exciting news from Amy Brink for One City, One Book 2020. Drum roll.
Good evening, Mayor Buckley Weber and council members. So tonight, I feel like I was just here a few months ago, kind of introducing what our One City, One Book was in the fall for Councilmember Northrup. But tonight we're here to get a head start on our One City, One Book program. So I would like to introduce our book for the year for Mayor Buckley Weber. But we can't get started without, on tonight, the night of our volunteer recognition. Recognizing our One City, One Book Committee one more time. Obviously, Mayor Buckley Weber is part of it. Nina Hull, Katie Magaha, Rachel Lizette from the Agoura Hills Library. Judy Carter and Joan Yakovone, our friends of the Agoura Hills Library. Tina Johnson with the LVUSD Library. She's the media specialist. Randy Paller, who's still with us tonight, our RAD event chair, and Karen Kent, our Cultural Arts Council. We've actually been working on this one as well for a couple of months, so we've put a lot of effort into it, and we're very excited about it. So the City of Agoura Hills, along with the Agoura Hills Library and the Friends of the Agoura Hills Library and the Cultural Arts Council proudly present the 2020 One City, One Book selection is, I got a drum roll, Educated, a memoir by Tara Westover. So we're very excited about this novel. This is a book, Educated was instantly a #1 New York Times bestseller, and it was one of New York Times' top 10 books back in 2018. It is a book that's been sold in 54 territories and has now been translated into 39 different languages. It's a book, Tara Westover was a 17-year-old who first stepped into the classroom at 17. She was raised by survivalists in the mountains of Idaho. So it's all about her upbringing, not stepping into a classroom until she was 17, and then becoming, as you can see, somebody who graduated magna cum laude from BYU and eventually was awarded a PhD in history. So it's all about her life story. It's an amazing story. The book is still on the New York Times bestseller. Hasn't gone to paperback yet, so the committee is really excited about bringing our author to Agoura Hills. So with that, I would also like to say that we are very excited to say that we're having an evening with Tara Westover. We've worked really hard on it. It's going to be Thursday, April 30th at the Agoura High School PAEC, the Performing Arts and Education Center. We will be having our reception. We'll start at 5 o'clock with Ms. Westover going on stage around 6 o'clock. I will make a side note for those who are watching the live stream of our evening tonight that we will not be accepting registrations until Monday, March 2nd. So although we're announcing the book tonight because we're so excited, we are not going to be starting to take registrations until Monday, March 2nd. We'll open it up. We'll be sending out information to the community. It'll be on our website. We'll put it out through social media, letting people know how they'll be able to register. So it'll be available Monday, March 2nd. And then we also wanted to say, although we're not ready to announce our children's book selection for the year, we did want to say that we are still working with the school district to provide the Read with Mayor activity. Students from an Agora Hills Elementary School will be visiting the library. We're so thrilled. I know Nina Hull is in the audience right now, our library manager, and we have a really great morning planned with the mayor where the kids come up. We bus them up from one of the local elementary schools, and they get to listen to a book be read by the mayor. So get your reading skills on, Mayor Buckley Weber. And we also are partnering this year with LV Reads. We're really excited about that. The school district has an amazing reading program that they offer during the summer to kids that need help with reading and that want to get ahead in reading. So we're really fortunate to be working with them alongside with the Friends of the Library to promote reading this year. So we're really excited about that. So if you have any other questions, we just encourage you to visit the website in the next couple of weeks with the information on how to register. But congratulations to the mayor and to the One City, One Book Committee, because this is an amazing effort. We're really excited about it.
Yes, thank you very much. She's an amazing author. And it's one of her, if not her very first West Coast appearance. So we feel thrilled that she's coming out to Agora Hills. I have a quick question. Does anyone have any questions? So Ms. Hull, will the library have enough books for all of us to, whoever hasn't read Educated, we want you to read it. It's a fabulous story.
We are ordering some library copies of books. We're actually started getting them today, so we will have some.
Great. So at our local library right here in Agora Hills, you will be able to get, if you go down there, you can check out a book. You can also probably get it on Kindle as well.
Actually, Mayor Buckley Weber, that's a good point. Usually when we start to select our books for the program, we ask the library, what's the most popular book? What has the biggest waiting list? And I think if I'm correct, Nina, this one, when it first came out, had over 400 people on a waiting list to get the book in circulation. So we're really excited about it.
That's great. I'm really excited as well. Thank you all for helping with this project. It's one of my favorites. Okay, so moving on now. We have gotten through our intergovernmental special purpose committee and departmental reports. We're going to go to public comments, and this section is reserved for persons wishing to speak on items not listed on the agenda that are under the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Please submit a speaker's card to City Clerk and limit testimony to 3 minutes. Ms. Rodriguez, do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, Jason Aiken.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Some of you. Anyway, I'm here to speak and say I'm for the separation of church and state. I don't think that cities should permit religious construction on public property. Therefore, I'm against the IRUV that is permitted on public property here in Agora Hills. I don't want to enter a special religious zone to go to my house. I don't want to cross a religious boundary to walk to the grocery store. An IRUV creates a private domain, and my house is now in a private domain. I don't want to live in a private domain. I want to live in a public domain. If I choose to sell my house, then I'll need to disclose to the buyers that the house is inside a city-permitted religious structure. Allowing a religious boundary on public property leads to segregation. People like me who want public property to be a secular space will move out, and they'll be replaced by people who want to live under a less secular government, a government that permits a religious boundary on public property. In researching this, I've looked at the Tenafly IRUV Association versus the Borough of Tenafly. And in Tenafly, they let everybody post on utility poles, but they specifically singled an IRUV as you can't post. You can't, post lines across the posts. You know how ERUs work. So the ERUV Association sued because they felt they were singled out by the city for religious reasons. The judge said the city could have a neutral law that would permit an ERUV or other post that would not, I'm sorry, the judge said the city could have a neutral law that would not permit the ERUV or other postings, but not selectively exclude the ERUV. Agora is a totally different situation. We have a neutral ordinance already that prevents posting on signs. I can't post something against the ERUV on a post because you don't allow, you know, posting of garage sale signs or political signs, or, you know, it's a neutral thing, including garage. Anyway, in Agora Hills. Anyway, let me go. I got my last thing to say here. So I've spoken to people about this and about the fact that a 200-pound fishing line could be bad for birds, and someone had posted on the Acorn that it had damaged a hawk. And then most of the people for the ERUV say, oh, it's no effect. And so I say, if it's no effect, then why do they have the same fishing line for a long time, for more than 20 years, above the Agora High School pool? They put the line there so the birds won't come and, like, I guess, bother the swimmers or be there. And I haven't talked to the coaches there about if they've ever found any birds or owls or bats or anything like that. But it does have an effect on birds, so that's something. I think that my mic turned off after 3 minutes.
Well, thank you very much for coming in to speak tonight.
Thanks.
Any other speakers?
We do not.
Thank you very much. So next on our agenda is the consent calendar. First, I want to just announce that the staff report for item number 10 was received yesterday afternoon and distributed to the City Council, the city's website, and C-mail, and a copy has been placed in the public book. Excuse me. Ms. Rodriguez, do we have any public speakers on tonight's consent calendar?
We do not.
Thank you. Do I have any council members who want to pull anything off of the agenda, the consent calendar tonight, or have any questions about anything? Okay, then I'm going to call for a motion, a second, to adopt consent calendar.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the consent calendar has been approved. The next thing, we have a discussion regarding housing legislation update. And tonight we have with us Diana Verrett. Hi, Diana. And she's going to provide a staff presentation. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Buckley Weber and members of the City Council. It is always a pleasure to be back in Agora Hills. It's nice to see all of you. I'm here this evening to provide the city with an update about the most recent amendments to state planning and zoning law as it relates to housing. So the state at this point has acknowledged that we have a housing crisis in California, and they are responding to that crisis in a number of ways. The primary way that I want to talk about this evening, though, is how the state's most recent amendments place substantial focus on having local agencies remove barriers to housing approvals. And they do this in a couple of ways. One, through streamlining housing approvals, and two, by setting sort of maximums or preferred development standards for certain types of housing. So while some of the new laws identify land or require local agencies in the state to identify land where housing development can occur, and create some funding sources for local agencies to do planning for housing, the laws that require the most immediate action on the part of local agencies are those that require that cities expedite permit processing for housing, establish zoning and development standards to encourage more housing, and create incentives for the development of affordable housing specifically. So for that reason, most of my talk this evening is going to relate to Senate Bill 330, which amended the Permit Streamlining Act and the Housing Accountability Act. I'm also going to talk through the accessory dwelling units updates And quickly at the end, I'll refer to the changes to the state's density bonus law. So as part of SB 330, the state declared a statewide housing emergency for the next 5 years. So what SB 330 does, and it's broken into a few different parts, which I'll talk about this evening, is it amends the Permit Streamlining Act and the Housing Accountability Act, and also adopts a new provision of the local government code, or rather of the California Government Code, referred to as the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. And what all of those provisions do is seek to encourage the development of housing, and it's specifically affordable housing, by, in their words, expediting housing approvals and suspending local authority to impose certain restrictions on housing developments. So within SB 330, there are a few provisions that provide additional guidance as to how local agencies should treat all development projects pursuant to the Permit Streamlining Act. But the focus of SB 330 and what I'll talk about this evening is really the provisions regarding housing development projects. So for those housing development projects, SB 330 creates a new preliminary application process and limits the number of hearings that may be held for housing development projects. So I'll go through both of these in a little bit more detail. So this new preliminary application process sets out a set of 17 statutorily required pieces of information. And essentially, an applicant may but is not required to submit this preliminary application with all of those pieces of information. And once they do that and pay the permit processing fee for that preliminary application, that freezes the development standards that can be applied to that specific project. So essentially, if the city were to adopt later enacted policies after that date, it would not apply to a project that has already submitted a compliant preliminary application. This doesn't mean that the city can never amend its policies or standards. It just means for that specific project that has submitted the preliminary application in accordance with state law, those new policies wouldn't apply. The expediting part of this process sort of comes in on the back end. So I see this provision more as creating certainty for developers as to what standards will apply going through their process so that they're not caught off guard when standards change midstream. But the benefit from expediting sort of perspective is that in order to maintain that benefit of the frozen development standards, the applicant has to submit a full project application within 6 months. So the idea is you get some benefit of certainty of development standards, but you need to move rather quickly on getting your project application in. So I want to note that the preliminary application process freezes the development standards and the zoning standards, but that really relates more to the construction of the project and sort of the mass and how the construction occurs, not so much about the use and occupancy of that project later. So even if a project application were connected to a preliminary application, they got their preliminary application in, they froze their development standards, they went through the process of getting a full application approved, and they built the housing. If the city later enacts requirements regarding the use and occupancy of housing, that can still apply to that type of project. So anything, if the city were to try to adopt new housing inspection rules or limit short-term rentals, those sorts of use and occupancy requirements absolutely could still apply to that type of project. So those are the procedural issues with respect to this new state-compliant preliminary application process. The state also enacted a new provision of the Permit Streamlining Act, which limits the number of hearings that may be held by a public agency after the date the full project application was deemed complete to no more than 5 hearings. So this includes continued public hearings. So if the Planning Commission or the Council were to continue a hearing from one meeting to another, that would actually be 2 of the 5, not just 1. The caveat here is that if any application has a legislative approval that's part of the requirement for approval of the project, and that would include a general plan amendment, a zoning code amendment, possibly a development agreement. For any project requiring a legislative approval, this limitation on the number of hearings would not apply. But the idea here is to keep the project moving as quickly as possible, at least with respect to housing. And again, this only applies to housing development projects. So that's the first portion of SB 330, and I want to move to the second and third pieces of SB 330, which is the new provisions in the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. What this section of SB 330 does is essentially two primary things. One, it, for the next 5 years, prohibits cities and what are called affected cities or counties, and these are really cities and counties in the most urbanized areas of the state. HCD has put out a list of those. Agora Hills is within an urbanized area, so these provisions do apply. And so for those affected cities and counties, for the next 5 years, they may not restrict housing and residential density in a few specific ways, which I'll talk through in a minute. The second provision is that the Housing Crisis Act says that a public agency shall not, or an affected city or county shall not approve a housing development project unless the project meets a set of replacement unit requirements. And that's really for the redevelopment of sites where there's existing housing. The state doesn't want us to go below the number of existing units we have at this point. So if you're tearing down existing housing to build new housing, there are some requirements to make sure we're not reducing the number of housing units and the affordability level also. So with respect to those limitations on local authority for the next 5 years, the big one is that the city may not reduce the allowable intensity in any land use designation in the general plan or zoning district, or downzone any specific property, let's say from multifamily to single family, essentially to a less intensive use, below what was allowed on January 1st, 2018. And the reasoning behind this, I think, is the original housing package was adopted in 2017, went into effect on January 1st, 2018. So the state is essentially saying we don't want to go below the capacity for residential units that we had at that time. So for those cities that might have tried to downzone since the housing package went into place, we're going to make you go back to what was there before, at least, or go higher. So this is a pretty big change in that if a city wanted to reduce a specific property from multifamily to single family, or reduce, let's say, the density allowed in any particular zoning district or land use designation, it would not be able to do that unless, and this is the caveat, unless they determine that they're creating making up for that loss of capacity somewhere else. So that's where I say exception for no net loss compliance. So essentially, if you're going to reduce the residential capacity on one site or in one zoning district, you have to make sure you're increasing the residential capacity somewhere else in the city under this SB 330 provision. So the second group of things that cities are prohibited from doing for the next few years is the first one is imposing a moratorium on housing. The second one is limiting the number of approvals or construction permits for housing that can be issued in any specific time period. The third one is capping the number of housing units that can be approved in any specific area or in the city as a whole. Finally, limiting the city's population expressly, saying we won't increase above a certain number of people is prohibited. And then lastly, with respect to design standards, the state is really trying to move local agencies from subjective standards, which require the imposition of sort of our value judgments to determine whether something is compatible or consistent, to a set of objective design standards. And so what this provision does is say that we can continue to use subjective design standards if they were in place as of January 1, 2020. But if an affected city wants to adopt or amend the new design standards, they would have to be objective. So it's really trying to get cities to move towards objective design standards and having more of a streamlined process at the local level. So those are the things that, the ways in which local authority is reduced for the next few years under SB 330. This last part that I want to talk about is the way in which cities are prohibited from approving housing development projects unless they replace all of the existing dwelling units. So if you're going to demolish a 10-unit building and reconstruct housing on that site, you need to reconstruct at least 10 units. There are also some special affordability requirements if you're going to demolish what are called protected units, and that is defined as any property that has a deed restriction for affordability for those units. In a city with rent control, it would be units subject to rent control. If the units are actually occupied by low or very low income households and the city is aware of that, those units would be considered protected units. And finally, if the units were taken off the market, withdrawn from the market pursuant to the Ellis Act within the prior 10 years, those units would be considered protected units. And there's a whole set of requirements with respect to the affordability of the replacement units if the new project would require the demolition of those types of protected units. So given that SB 330 is expressly intended to encourage housing and encourage the retention of affordable housing, there are specific provisions in the law that say that local agencies absolutely may create objective provisions that protect lower income households now. So if a city wanted to, they could require a greater number of lower income units be provided in replacement housing if they're concerned that there might be a loss of existing affordable housing due to reconstruction, for example. There is also a small provision in SB 330 that talks about providing displaced tenants with relocation assistance. That's an obligation that's on the project developer. And they also need to let the tenants stay in their housing for until 6 months before construction begins. And so the law explicitly says that local agencies can require greater relocation assistance to displaced households if they're concerned about those sorts of things. So there are some ways in which cities can be more protective of existing lower income households. So there are a couple caveats here. Along the same lines I was just talking about, cities certainly still have the ability to adopt policies that increase the capacity for housing by, increasing the allowable density. CEQA remains intact, so if the city needs to adopt policies to impose or implement mitigation measures under CEQA, that's absolutely still okay. And for any project that would still go through the discretionary review process, and CEQA would apply, all of the things that come along with that still would apply to the project. And finally, the SB 330 says that it does not apply to housing development projects in very high fire hazard severity zones, and so cities retain authority over the housing projects in those areas. So I want to do a little bit of putting all of this in context of what the housing laws in the state previously were and are. There is a process, as you know, called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment process, by which the state and the Southern California Association of Governments, which is our regional government in this region, determine a total number of units that the counties and cities in the area need to provide, or at least make sure that they have capacity to provide in the coming 8-year housing element update cycle. And then each agency is allotted a certain number of those units based on a whole slew of complicated methodologies. But so each city gets its regional housing needs assessment allocation, which is broken up into 4 different income levels. And then based on that information, each city must adopt a housing element that's part of its general plan, identifying how it's going to address the city's future growth and those specific numbers of housing. And so what happens then is that the city, as part of its housing element update, identifies actual sites in the city where housing could conceivably be accommodated and realistically be accommodated in the coming 8-year housing cycle. Once the city's done that, there is a no net loss provision related to the housing element, which essentially says that once you've said a site is available for housing, you can't reduce the density of that site unless you identify other sites in the city that make up for that loss of capacity. So it's sort of a similar concept, but related specifically to the sites that you identify as available for housing in the coming housing element cycle. And then lastly, the state has amended the Housing Accountability Act a couple times in the last few years, but I just wanted to mention that it is a provision of state law that affects not so much how the city regulates land use with respect to allowable density, but with respect to how cities approve projects. And what the Housing Accountability Act essentially says is that for a project that complies with the objective standards set by the city, the city's discretion with respect to disapproving that project or reducing the density is very limited. And so these are all of the various housing laws that SB 330 sort of came into on top of. And they're important for both the council and the public to understand that these are all the laws that the city has to comply with. And they're evolving, and there's a lot of moving parts. So I want to move on to accessory dwelling units. This state law is
Do you want to open it up to questions now? Do you? Yeah, we were actually going to do the housing element at the next, we were going to discuss it was it the next meeting or at the workshop? Right. Yeah. Do you mind if we wait, Councilmember Anstead? Just write down your question.
I got it when I'm going to ask,
great.
but I thought I'd discuss it.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to accessory dwelling units, which is a law that's been amended a few times in the last few years. And over time, the state has required that local agencies adopt more streamlined approvals for these types of units, which previously were referred to as granny flats or second units. The state tried to create a uniform terminology, so we're now referred to them as accessory dwelling units or ADUs. And in 2017, when the state amended this provision of state law, they stated that the local agencies have to adopt an ordinance that creates objective standards by which ADUs could be approved through a ministerial process. They also created an even more streamlined permit process for conversions of existing space in existing homes or existing accessory structures that would be subject only to a building permit, and the building standards not subject to local agency planning and zoning standards. The way I see it, the state has sort of turned that a little bit on its head, and now so most ADUs likely will fall into 4 categories of what I'm referring to as building permit only process ADUs, and those are subject only to the state standards with respect to planning and zoning that are outlined in that particular provision of the government code. And then in addition, if an ADU were not to fall into that building permit only process in those 4 categories, the local agency has the authority to adopt a local ordinance that allows ADUs through a ministerial process, again, only based on objective development standards. If a local agency does not adopt local ADU standards, the standards that would apply are those that are in the government code by default, which are a little bit more bare bones than one might adopt at the local level. So I want to go through the 4 categories of sort of building permit only ADUs. And as an explanation, ADUs and JADUs, what we're calling here, are 2 overlapping but distinct things. An accessory dwelling unit is a unit that has sufficient capacity for permanent living with a full bathroom and a full kitchen. A junior accessory dwelling unit is a much smaller unit that doesn't need to have its own bathroom but can, and would have even more minimal kitchen facilities. So these are 2 slightly different things. A JADU is always going to be attached to the primary residence. An ADU can be either attached or detached. So this first category under the building permit only process provisions says that through a building permit, a property owner can get 1 ADU or 1 JADU within the proposed single-family dwelling, within the existing space of a single-family dwelling, or within the existing space of an accessory structure. And this is essentially the prior conversion provision, but beefed up a little bit. And they can expand the accessory structure by 150 square feet if it's required for ingress or egress. And so long as they have setbacks that are acceptable for fire and safety, exterior access, and then the JADU complies with various statutory requirements for JADUs, they are not subject to the local planning and zoning requirements. So that's the first category. The second category, back to what is a JADU. So these are the definitions of a JADU. It's contained entirely within the walls of a single-family residence. It's not going to be larger than 500 square feet. That's defined in state law. And it has to have some semblance of a cooking facility, but it's pretty minimal. There's still a provision saying that JADUs may be required to be owner-occupied. They've taken that away for ADUs, but for JADUs, that's still in state law. So the second category is a detached new ADU. And this previously would have come under the local standards, and now if it meets this set of very limited requirements, it comes under the building permit only process. So for a lot with either a proposed or existing single family dwelling, if you're proposing an 800 square foot ADU, no higher than 16 feet, that is set back at least 4 feet on the side and rear yard lot lines, you can get that ADU through the building permit only process. The state law also says that you can get 1 detached new ADU plus 1 JADU through this process. You cannot, through this process, get 1 detached new ADU plus 1 attached ADU, but you could get that detached new ADU plus 1 JADU. So those 2 categories apply to single family lots, and then the state added 2 new provisions with respect to multifamily properties. Through the building permit only process, these apply to properties with existing multifamily property. So this first category is allowing the conversion of non-livable space. And state law says you have to allow the conversion of space into at least 1 ADU, but possibly more, up to 25% of the existing number of multifamily dwelling units in the building. So for example, if you have an 8-unit apartment building, local agencies would be required to allow them to have 2 units converted in their non-livable space. And that refers to basements and garages and attics and the like. The fourth category similarly is on properties with existing multifamily buildings, and this is to allow up to 2 detached ADUs on a lot with a limit of 16 feet and again 4-foot rear and side yard setbacks. So those are the 4 different categories that would come in through this building permit only process. And what it means if you fall in those categories is that the city cannot impose any other local planning and zoning standards. Building code standards still apply. The city cannot require the correction of non-conforming zoning conditions, but certainly of building standards issues that would need to be updated for health and safety. State law also specifically says that if an ADU is approved through this building permit only process, short-term rentals are prohibited. So the idea here is very much to create new housing, not to create new spaces for short-term rentals. So that's how the new building permit only process works. And the city, of course, still has that authority to adopt a local ordinance. The local ordinance has to approve ADUs through a ministerial process based on objective standards. But through the local process, the city could designate allowed areas for ADUs based on the potential inadequacy of water and sewer service or possible traffic flow and public safety issues with approving ADUs in a specific area. The city also can establish local standards, but those standards are limited somewhat by the standards that are explicitly contained in state law. Whereas the 2017 provisions granted local agencies more leeway, the current version of state law limits local authority in some new ways. So a local ordinance may not require a minimum lot size for a property to be eligible for an ADU. For ADUs, we cannot require owner occupancy, which many cities did previously. If a property owner converts a garage into an ADU, the city cannot require that those lost parking spaces for the primary residence be replaced. And then the local ordinance may still impose certain things like lot coverage or other size requirements, but they can't be applied to prohibit an 800 square foot ADU, so that would still have to be allowed. With respect to the actual size of the units, for a detached unit, state law says the total floor area shall not exceed 1,200 square feet. If a city does not adopt a local ordinance, arguably they're stuck with the 1,200 square feet number, but state law also says that a local ordinance may set a maximum unit size slightly lower to 850 square feet for an ADU that is a studio or one bedroom, or 1,000 square feet for an ADU with 2 or more bedrooms. For properties where you have an existing dwelling and the proposal is to create an ADU that is an attached ADU to that existing dwelling, the city can limit the size of that attached ADU to not exceed 50% of the square footage of the existing single family home. With respect to local parking standards, the state law now says that local agencies cannot require more than 1 parking space per ADU, but even requiring 1 parking space is somewhat limited because the city cannot require parking in any of those instances listed there. Most importantly, if you're within half-mile walking distance of public transit, which includes a bus stop, or potentially within 1 block of a car share vehicle, for example, a zip car, you cannot require parking. Also, for attached ADUs or converted accessory structures, we cannot require a parking space. So really the only parking spaces we're going to be requiring are of new detached ADUs that are not within half-mile walking distance of public transit or these other limitations. So that's sort of it with respect to the local agency requirements. There was a separate bill this past year that limited the authority of homeowners associations and conditions of and restriction CCNRs that they cannot prohibit or unreasonably restrict the construction of ADUs and JADUs on single family lots. So at this point, homeowners associations may have to revise their CCNRs to address that, but from the city's perspective, we're approving projects based on what state law requires at this point. So that's it for ADUs, and now I just have a couple more slides on the density bonus law, which was amended this past year to seek to encourage affordable housing development. Just a brief overview of what state density bonus law does generally. So under existing law, if you have a qualifying project, which means you're reserving some portion of the new units in the housing development project for affordable housing or senior housing, you're entitled to receive a number of things. First, you get a density bonus, which is an allowance of additional units or square footage over what would otherwise be allowed by the local general plan and zoning regulations. You get a specific number of incentives and concessions based on the type of housing development and sort of how many affordable units you're putting in that housing development. Incentives and concessions are really just deviations from development standards, so deviations from setbacks and height requirements and those sorts of things. Separately, if a development standard would physically preclude the construction of the development, the applicant can seek a waiver or reduction of those development standards. That's separate and apart from the number of incentives and concessions they get, but they have to demonstrate that the application of the standard would physically preclude the development from being constructed. And then finally, there are some provisions about reducing the city's otherwise applicable minimum parking requirements for specific projects. So this is what a project that qualifies for a density bonus would normally get. And previously, there had been a whole slew of qualifying projects. So if you reserve 10% of the units for lower income households or 5% for very low income households, et cetera, you would be a qualifying project and be entitled to the things that state law says you're entitled to. Under AB 1763, which was adopted last year, there's a new category of qualifying project. And to be eligible, you have to have at least 80% of the units in the project to be reserved for lower income households. And again, those are households making less than 80% of the area median income. The remaining units above that 80% could be reserved for either lower or moderate income households. And so long as those affordability levels are met, the project is a qualifying 100% affordable project under this new category of density bonus eligible projects. Under state law for the other qualifying projects, the maximum density bonus granted to a project is 35%. And most projects receive 1 or 2, possibly 3 incentives if they're including a significant amount of affordable units in the project. The benefits for these 100% affordable projects are significant because they're vastly above what I just mentioned. So these projects get an 80% density bonus based on the number of lower income units that are reserved in the project. And they get 4 incentives, concessions, and potentially additional reductions in parking requirements. So this state law was really intended to create significant incentives to the development of new 100% affordable projects. So I just want to touch on a few additional laws that the city should be aware of. There are new requirements with respect to what should be on the city's website. We've certainly worked with staff on that, and most cities actually already comply with this. But the idea here is to create transparency with respect to development standards and potential fees that might apply to housing specifically. The state also is seeking to streamline certain types of development projects through ministerial processes. So for example, supportive housing approvals and emergency shelters that are referred to as low barrier navigation centers. These are now processes through state law whereby local agencies are required to approve those through a ministerial process, assuming they comply with the extensive set of criteria in state law. And then finally, there are some additional provisions in state law to protect tenants, for example, just cause eviction and a statewide cap on annual rent increases. And then lastly, there are some changes to the surplus land requirements that deal with how cities dispose of city-owned property. So I wanted to focus today on the housing-related bills to make sure everyone is up to speed on that, but these are additional bills that may be of import to the city moving forward. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. That was very informative. Why don't we start so that there's some organization to this? Does anybody have any questions for Diana on the housing development part of this? Okay, go ahead. And then we'll go to the ADUs, and then we'll go to the density bonus law.
Okay.
So starting with the housing development, why don't you go first?
Sure. I mean, my first comment is, boy, man, I mean, there's a lot of legislation coming out of the state on all this, on the housing issue, which I agree that the housing is an issue, it's just hard to believe how people even keep up with all the laws that are coming out on this subject. The first question I had was, you talked about the high fire zone and how if you were in a high fire zone, none of these changes, or at least on the first AB 330 or whatever the number of the bill was, doesn't apply if you're in a high fire zone. So what I'm trying to understand is Agora Hills considered to be, are we all, as our city, in, like we discussed it before, are we the whole city in the high fire zone, or
No.
just the part over on next to the Santa Monica Mountains? What part are we excluded from, and what part do we have to apply?
So my understanding is that a good portion, but not the entire city, is within what's called a very high fire hazard severity zone, one of the least easy to pronounce phrases the state has ever created. There are processes by which the state makes determinations about fire zones, and then the local agencies also, I believe, take part in that process. And so there are maps created as to the outline of very high fire hazard severity zones. And SB 330 has all of these provisions in it, and then one of the final provisions states that the section shall not apply to housing development projects in very high fire hazard severity zones. So for the portion of the city that is within those zones, the city would retain authority over the projects in those areas.
And none of the updates would apply to it. In other words, some of the updates where you can't modify existing zoning laws, you can't change the density levels, so none of that applies to most of our city.
That's our understanding with respect to the very high fire hazard severity zones at this point, yes.
And could I jump in?
Sure.
Mayor? So, and as Diana had noted, that's just with regard to SB 330. Right. That is another level of the housing legislation that has been put into place. We still have no net loss provisions. Yeah. We still have the Housing Accountability Act. So while we may be able to adopt standards under SB 330, we still would have to comply with no net loss. For example, she gave an example of we were to reduce density, we still have to follow no net loss. That would mean we'd have to upzone in another area. Okay. Yeah. So it doesn't mean, hey, we get to do whatever I want. It's right. Just one of the pieces of legislation.
So we still have to apply to all the other pieces of legislation that are in there.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. So, I mean, if we're specifically talking about, one of the things that I wanted to specifically discuss, obviously, is the Gore Village specific plan. So, if any changes were made on the Gore Village specific plan, or if we were considering making any changes to the plan, any changes that we made to the plan, again, all these other laws apply to. So if we changed, as an example, and I'm only throwing this out as an example, if we were to try to change the density levels, or try to change moving, or saying that we didn't want to have 3 stories and we only wanted to have 2 stories, all those other laws would apply to the changes that we were going to try to make to the Gore Village specific plan. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. That's good to know. I think those were the 2 biggest questions. I'll let other people ask after that. Thank you.
Okay, just most of mine are clarifications more than questions. So to follow up on Councilmember Ansted's question, for the very high fire severity zones, which I probably got backwards, earlier in the year, we talked about this in terms of building codes, and we decided what we were. So are you saying that this is something that we decide, or you're saying that this is something that the state has decided whether or not we are in such a zone?
So there are portions of the city that are in the very high fire severity zone. It's not the entire city, as you may recall from our previous discussion. So those areas that are not, in that do not fall under that category, even though we applied, or the council made the decision to apply the tougher or stringent building codes. It doesn't apply necessarily to the housing.
I just thought we were, during that discussion, that we had some discretion of what we considered not just for building purposes, but for definition purposes. So I want to make sure that we are not defining what is considered the very high severity fire zone in this situation for SB 30.
Correct. That map and areas are established by the state.
Okay. Okay. My next question is about the subjective design plans. So we do, for example, have our Old Agora overlay in place that has certain design standards. It's been in place for years. So it sounds to me like that's set, it's able to stay in place. But the subjectivity of it, what if we need to tweak it?
So the idea behind that provision, as I understand it, is that the state is trying to encourage agencies to devise objective design standards. So at this point, your existing design standards, if they are subjective, could still be applied, but if the city were to make tweaks, any changes would need to be objective moving forward. That's how the law is written at this point.
Okay. Okay, and then I have some other questions that I believe relate more to ADUs, so I'll wait. But the last question I have just in general is, can we please get a copy of this? Because I'm going to need to read this like 10 times. It's a lot to absorb, and so I'm wondering if we can get a copy of it. And also, obviously, our Planning Commission needs to see this, and frankly, if the public can access it, that would be great too. I mean, they can always watch this, but if we can get a copy of the presentation, I know it would help me. Okay, thank you. I'll save my other questions for ADUs.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions on the housing development?
I do.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Diana. What a thorough and well-researched presentation. Glad I didn't have to do it. I've been practicing real estate law for a long time. It's a lot. But I do have a question. When we're talking about those subjective standards, and if we were to be making amendments to something that is in a high fire severity zone, then that would include not having to worry about the change from subjective to objective. None of those things apply, correct?
That's our understanding.
We have the ability to direct how we deal with development in the high fire severity zones.
That's our understanding of the law at this point.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Weber?
Thank you. That was like drinking from a fire hose. Would you repeat that? No. I want to follow up on my colleagues' questions, but the thing that I've heard, and it's rumors and suppositions, but is there, as part of the laws that were recently passed, will it permit more than one ADU on a parcel, even though maybe the parcel normally wouldn't allow for more than one? Are we being forced to allow more than what we consider an appropriate number of ADUs on one piece of property?
So yes, at this point, what's allowed by right through the building permit process is a single-family home, an attached junior accessory dwelling unit, which is a 500 square foot unit that's attached, and a detached dwelling unit up to 800 square feet. So arguably at this point, when you read about sort of the change from single-family zoning or the end of single-family zoning, what they're talking about is saying that on a home that previously may have only had one home, now it possibly could have a home, a 500 square foot JADU, and an 800 square foot detached ADU. So that's what's on the books at the moment. I will note that there's a bill pending that would expressly amend state law to explicitly state you get an ADU and a detached ADU, not just the JADU and detached ADU. So we'll see if that passes, but at this point, what's allowed is the one ADU, JADU, and a detached ADU.
That's what I was getting at. Thank you.
I do have one question. How exactly do you define a housing development project? Is that more than one unit, or is there a minimum number of units before it's considered a housing development project?
So the definition of housing development project is cross-referenced from the Housing Accountability Act, and it's defined as a use consisting of residential units only, mixed-use developments where 2/3 of the square footage is reserved for residential uses, and transitional or supportive housing. So that definition is a use of residential units only. It doesn't explicitly refer to multifamily or single family.
That's all I have for housing development projects. Why don't we move on to ADUs? Anybody have questions about ADUs? Councilmember Lopez?
Okay, can you, the replacement parking, that was referring to, one of the comments about replacement parking was referring to the ADUs, correct? In the sense that, and I need to describe it in real examples because it's the way I can wrap my head around it. Are you saying that if someone converts their garage into a JADU, for example, they don't have to replace that parking on the lot?
Correct. So previously, state law allowed for the conversion of a garage into an ADU and allowed a local agency to require that the primary home replace those potentially lost parking spaces. And it said previously that they didn't have to actually do an enclosed garage, but the local agency could require that they replace them. Now that explicitly says that a local agency cannot require replacement parking. So if you convert your garage and those 2 spaces in the garage were the 2 parking spaces according to the code when the home was originally built, the local agency cannot require that the property owner build or accommodate those 2 parking spaces on the property.
So in essence, this could potentially push a lot of traffic on, or car parking onto the street?
Possibly.
Okay. And in terms of whether we have few areas in the city where we have permitted parking. I know of at least one. I don't know if we have more than one. How does that affect?
You're talking about permits for on-street parking?
For residents. Like, for example, by the high school, we have a neighborhood that you have to have a permit to park so that students don't go into that neighborhood.
Yeah, so it doesn't affect the city's authority to require permits for on-street parking. So if the city had that program, that they could still require permits for on-street parking.
Okay. And then just how is the state, how are they, whoever they are, how are the homeowners associations getting the word from the state, or how are they going to know about it? They're all piecemeal all over the place, volunteers. I mean, how is that on earth going to play out?
So, I mean, servicing only public agencies, I don't know entirely, but my understanding is that a homeowners association traditionally would have a sort of restrictions on ADUs, many of them at least in their CC&Rs. I think this bill got a lot of media attention, and my guess would be that the attorneys who service homeowners associations are well aware of this provision and probably contacting their former clients to update those CC&Rs with potentially new restrictions.
Okay.
So that would be my guess.
It's not the cities, I mean, my fear is that it's going to put an undue burden on cities that.
No, it is not the city's obligation to address this. That's that provision of the law is specific to homeowners associations.
Okay. And then can I ask a question about the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify, as Diana noted, if if the city gets an application for an ADU or a JADU, we will just process it according to state law. We're not going to be checking, nor is it advisable, nor are we really allowed to check with the homeowners associations for consistency with, their CCNRs. Well, it's just going to be processed per state law.
Okay, yeah, I just worry they're going to then come back to us and start the HOAs, but
Yes.
we just stay out of that.
Right.
Okay. And then I do have one more question about the density bonus, but you want me to wait?
Why don't you wait on
Okay.
that, and we'll come to that. Councilmember Anstead, do you have any questions about ADUs? Okay, anybody else have questions about ADUs? I have a couple of questions. So just so I'm clear, does Senate Bill 330 have an impact if you want ADUs in a very high fire severity zone?
No, those two bills are separate. So the
Completely
ADU
separate.
bill does not address high fire hazard severity zones at all.
Okay.
So the ADU allowance is for properties even within those zones.
But there is an exemption for ADUs if it affects the traffic flow and public safety?
So the way the law is written right now, and it was previously in there as well, was that the local ordinance provisions for any ADUs that do not fall within the building permit only categories could be limited depending on whether the city found that a specific area of the city either had an inadequate supply of water and sewer service, or that the development of ADUs in a specific area would lead to traffic flow and or public safety concerns. And that's sort of all it says at this point, that the city can designate areas where ADUs are permitted and presumably not permitted, but it can only designate those areas on those specific bases.
Great.
Yeah.
And then lastly, for the ADU parking space, so if you live further than half a mile from public transit, can the city still have some sort of a parking ordinance?
So the parking space requirement for an ADU cannot be more than one space per ADU.
Okay.
There's no parking space requirement for JADUs. So cities cannot require a parking space for the JADU. And then the local agency's authority to impose that one parking space requirement on an ADU would depend on whether it falls within those various categories, including the half a mile within public transit.
Okay, great. So, a question for staff or the city manager. Are we working on a local ADU ordinance? I mean, I know we already have one, but are we working on it to comply with some of these new? Is that going to be coming for us this year? Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Diana to expand a little bit on the permit-only kind of aspect of all this from a ministerial standpoint, because as I understand it, things such as a detached ADU and our oak tree ordinance and things like that are going to be impacted, right? And could you expand a little bit on that so the council's fully versed?
So from a ministerial permit process perspective, a permit is ministerial if it's based on objective standards, so that the person reviewing the permit just has to look at a set of standards, check boxes, and essentially say, yes, it meets the height requirement, yes, it meets setback requirements, and those sorts of things. That's for the building permit. If there are other requirements based on building standards or other things that are not planning and zoning, the city still maintains authority to impose those requirements. So there might be grading plan requirements, those sorts of things for public safety that would be still required of an application to go through before it was permitted, even through the building permit only process.
Okay, I have no other questions about ADUs. Are we done with that? Anybody have any questions about density bonus?
I just, back to your comment, so our oak tree ordinance would supersede or would stay in place, is what you're saying?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
And one that's not entirely clear at this point.
Someone have a paper bag I can breathe into to try to
You mean oak
stay
tree
calm?
ordinance as it applies?
Well, Greg brought up our local oak tree ordinance, and if that were to conflict in some way with some of these parking or ADU standards, who wins?
Yeah. Okay. All right, we'll come back to that. So
Okay.
let's move on to if anybody
Okay.
has any questions about the density bonus law.
I just had, again, a clarification. So for the 100% affordable projects, if 80% of the units are lower income, which in itself is 80% of the median cost of living out here, they get an 80% density bonus?
That
So
is
if-
correct.
That's a lot of 80s. So
Yes.
if 80%, they can almost double the project size.
Correct.
Got it. Someone pass me that. Just, no, I just have to absorb it all. Thank you.
Any other questions on density bonus? Okay, well, thank you very much, Diana. That was very thorough. We're still going to have questions, and we may have to bring you back again. And as I recall, will you be coming to our workshop to give a version of the updates on the housing law at the February 26th workshop?
Yes, I will be back for the 26th workshop on the Agora Village specific plan. I will not be going through this extensive array of housing legislation, but talking about the provisions of state law that specifically affect the Agora Village
specific plan. Great, thank you very much. Ms. Rodriguez, does anybody here want to speak publicly? Do we have any speaker cards?
We do not.
Okay, do we have any other questions from council? All right, so no action is required on this item, so I'm just going to move right on. Thank you again, Diana. Okay, I'm going to read 3 or 4 announcements for everybody, so listen up. Los Angeles County Assessor Jeff Prang reminds homeowners that a savings awaits them only for the asking, which can result in a $7,000 drop in a home's taxable value. The homeowner's exemption reduces a property's taxable assessed value by $7,000, provided that the property is the owner's principal place of residence as of January 1st. The result is a $70 savings on the annual tax bill. Homeowners need only apply once in order to receive these savings each year. Savings continue until a change, such as a sale, is recorded. Moreover, many a homeowner is unaware of the tax savings program or has not taken advantage of it. The homeowner must file by February 15th to receive that's Saturday, to receive the full year-long savings. If a homeowner files after February 15th deadline, they will receive a prorated reduction this year only and receive the full amount in subsequent years. The homeowner's exemption claim form and filing information are available at assessor.lacounty.gov, or you can call 213-974-3211. Or you can check with our city clerk and she'll help you out with that, or at least point you in the right direction. The next announcement, the presidential primary election is scheduled for Tuesday, March 3, 2020. Please note that the county has moved away from precincts to vote centers. Registered voters of the city of Agora Hills will have the opportunity to vote at any of the designated vote centers throughout Los Angeles County. We are happy to announce that there will be 2 4-day vote centers in Agora Hills. One here at City Hall in the community room, which is right next door, and 2 at Lake Lindero Canyon Middle School in the multi-purpose room. Both Agora Hills vote centers will be open beginning Saturday, February 29th through Monday, March 2nd from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and on Election Day, Tuesday, March 3rd from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. To find a vote center closest to you, go to locator.lavvote.net/locations/VC. I also heard tonight from one of our volunteers that he will be manning a vote center at Pierce Mortuary, so that's also very close to us. Next announcement. The second workshop on the Agora Village Specific Plan, the AVSP, is scheduled for Wednesday, February 26, 2020, at the Event Center located at 29900 Ladyface Court. Check-in will be from 5 to 6 p.m., and the workshop will begin at 6 p.m. In addition to parking at the Event Center, a shuttle service will also be available to and from the Joni and Friends parking lot and the Event Center. We encourage all interested residents and stakeholders to submit their comments and questions in advance by emailing avsp.agora-hills.ca.us. Again, that's avsp.agora-hills.ca.us. It's also on our website. Information regarding the workshop is available on the city's website. Click on the orange banner at the top of the city's homepage at www.ci.agora-hills.ca.us. Updates and information will also be distributed via the city's social media, Facebook and Twitter. For any further questions, you may call the AVSP hotline at 818-597-7349. Again, that's 818-597-7349. A next announcement. The meeting of February 26, 2020 has been canceled. The next regular meeting of the City Council is scheduled for 6 p.m. Wednesday, March 11, 2020, in the Council chambers with a closed session at 5 p.m. And now I would like to ask us to adjourn in the memory of the victims of the helicopter crash. Although they didn't live in our community, I think almost everybody in this room has been involved in youth sports or other youth events. And so we know the pain, we know the fun of going to tournaments and being involved in sports. We know how important it is to have volunteers such as team parents, coaches, and assistant coaches. And so I would like to adjourn in the names of John, Carrie, and Alyssa Altaberry, Kobe and Gianna Bryant, Sarah and Peyton Chester, Christina Mauser, and Ara Zobayan, and I hope that's the way he pronounced his name. So with that, can I have a motion and a second to adjourn in the memory of these victims?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned.